Liberty in America is under assault. We no longer live in a reality that includes property rights. We're no longer the kings of our own castle. We no longer enjoy the true benefits of capitalism. Instead, we're negotiating our rights with our own government. This isn't how our country was founded. These aren't the ideas of our founders. It's time to seize back our country. This is the Liberty Hour, where these important issues will be discussed for the sake of America's future. With a cigar in one hand and a copy of the Constitution in the other, here's your host, Sean Thompson.
We stand with the Venezuelan people in their noble quest for freedom, and we condemn the brutality of the Maduro regime, whose socialist policies have turned that nation from being the wealthiest in South America into a state of abject poverty and despair. Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. America was founded on liberty and independence, and not coercion, domination, and control. We are born free, and we will stay free.
And that is why it is my favorite State of the Union in the last 12 years, bar none. You know what? In the last 25 years, my favorite State of the Union. Now, when I get ready for the show, I tell you this is the Liberty Hour. By the way, call in if you care to participate. 312-642-5600. And when I was offered the show, I put together the tagline, not just that the guy with the Batman voice reads, but I'm the one that when I come in, I say we discuss and dissect political talking points of both parties. Because what has destroyed our country is that we are just shouting talking points at each other. But every once in a while, something crucially important happens. And that's what that line in last night's State of the Union was. It was, number one, an admission of what we have become and what we are under attack with constantly by the socialist zealots called Democrats. And I know all the tramps were in white. It was a sign of solidarity. It looked to me like that here in Chicago, for those of you that don't live in Illinois, we have the church. I believe they're all illegal aliens. I'm not totally sure. And they attack you in traffic, and they all are dressed in white with their cans for charity. The Guatemalan, whatever it is. That was ridiculous to me. I didn't understand the point of the white outfits by all of the socialists, except to identify themselves as that. And I was sitting watching the State of the Union with my wife. And now, for those of you out there, I'm old-fashioned. I married a woman, and I know it's a little outrageous right now, but she is kind of my weather vane into the opinion of women. And I watch her, and by the way, she does not agree with me politically. In fact, when I met her, her father was a union president. She was a hardcore Democrat. So this is not, I didn't marry some step and fetch, go along to get along, some parrot, to my opinion. I liked the fact that we could have debates about everything. And I found her interesting, even, thought out to a certain point. And I knew that I could win her over with the ideology of principles and fundamentals, and I did. But anyway, I watch her as women speak as if they should have one voice. And if that voice is well represented by the cud-chewing old hag, corporatist fraud Nancy Pelosi and the other Soviets. So I can't sit idly by as they inundate us with talking points that this is how all women think. I think that's poppycock, and I think that will have a massive, massive backfire on the Democrat agenda as they keep trying to tell mothers and wives and women who watch their husbands work that they're all socialists now and that the state knows what's best for their family and their children. So I think that hopefully in the future, you'll start to see a rejection of the socialist agenda that was articulated beautifully by Donald Trump. Now, That being said, I'm not in when he says we're going to spend more and invest more. And so I'm not in for Keynesian economics that's sold as Trumponomics, but that's just an issue. The overarching point of his speech, I thought, was fantastic. And for those of you who've listened to me fill in when I fill in for Joe Walsh or when I'm in the morning show, or if you listen to the Liberty Hour on Sunday nights, 8 to 9 p.m., you know that I go after socialism even when Republicans sell it. But it is important to recognize when the President of the United States openly identifies and rejects what has become the largest political movement in the country, and that is the socialist tsunami of Democrats that have been elected to the House. And the fact that the leading prospects for the Democrat presidential nominee are all socialists. Whether you go with I'm sure he's heterosexual Cory Booker, all the way to the garbage can grouch Bernie Sanders, it is just different versions of the Venezuelan Soviet socialism. The problem I have is that sometimes we're dragged off into the deep water where we are so involved in the specifics of the argument that we do not pan back and realize what we're arguing. So I did something that not a lot of conservatives do yesterday. I watched a Michael Moore documentary. And I watched it on the day of the State of the Union because I wanted to know exactly what the take of the socialist pretending to be a Democrat was. And I'll tell you what, the first 40 minutes, if you're a Trump guy, you should watch it because it is comical as he covers election night and as he goes over the propaganda wing of the Socialist Party called the media and their predictions for the election. I found it to be, very funny. And then as the documentary goes on, it's evident that what you see is the mask slowly come off, where the Democrats reveal themselves to be the fascistic Nazis, socialist worker party representative frauds that they pretend to be. So this is nowhere more evident than in our education system. And in the documentary, along with what's happening in our real lives here in Chicago and in Illinois and throughout the country, is the idea that the union and unions represent the working man versus an extortion racket based in socialism. So now look, I've got all the clips here, by the way, from the morning show, and I could inundate you with clips, and we'll play a few. But I'm not going to just go, and I only got 40 minutes. I'm not just going to go clip, and then talk about something you're going to hear a different spin on. I want to talk about the fundamentals and principles and the differences between us and the enemy. Now, listen, I know it's unity, but the problem is when you pretend to collaborate or have unity with socialism, history has proven this, not just in this country, but primarily our reality right now. You cannot coexist with socialism. You can't do it. It is a cancer that metastasizes through your life and overtakes you everywhere. Not just your money, but your mores, your traditions, your way in which you live your daily life. And nothing represents that better than the socialist fascism of the teachers' union. And in this documentary last night, and in our states right now, as in Illinois, we watch what is not just a chubby checkers meeting. We watch the teachers' union as they march for pay. We watch them, and they're marching for a blind increase. But I want you to think about something when it comes to unions. And I would have this discussion, by the way, with my father-in-law, who I love dearly, who was the president of a union. And I would have this conversation with my father, who was a bricklayer, who, when I was an apprentice bricklayer, we were all going to be, he was telling me how great it is. And I said, and I never got this from a union guy. What is the incentive of a union worker to be extraordinary? I don't understand what that incentive is. If the sloth of whatever the industry is, the sloth teacher, the sloth bricklayer, the sloth truck driver gets paid the same amount. And the reality is that principle of what individuality is it is swallowed up, it is consumed, it is stifled in any organized labor extortion racket. Now, why do I call it an extortion racket? Because, number one, I never really looked at the magician when the trick was going on. I was looking at the hot assistant, and I saw her hand him the scarf or the rabbit or whatever the case was. So I don't want to just have the argument where the socialist, where the socialist zealot wants you to have the argument and focus on the talking point that they shout out at you, that all teachers are underpaid, which is a lie. Some are not, some are good, and some suck. Just like bricklayers, just like truck drivers, just like electricians and plumbers and everybody else. So the idea that there is a minimum standard, and we're going to get to the what's going on in Illinois later, that there is a minimum standard, and by the way, that minimum is also the maximum, it just brings down the quality of whatever it is that labor produces. And I don't just mean that how GM and Ford suck. I'm talking about how our education system sucks and how you've produced nothing extraordinary except those rare individuals you cannot hold down with any tether. But there's also another component to the organized crime extortion racket of unions. All unions, is they created an entire fake industry where the most prolific extortionists live, and that is the union hierarchy. From the president to the business agent to the secretary in the office to the fake investment IRA money bundling frauds, inside trading hacks that pretend to deliver on magic mystical pensions they can't. The entire echelon of union hierarchy is a scam. And it is in every single industry. Now, it's a shame that people think that they can depend on other people to represent their best interests. They can't. And no matter how many hundreds of years go by and you see the reality hit them sooner or later, for some reason, it is just some sort of human nature quality that we want to pretend some stranger looks out for us better than we can look out for ourselves. And they can't. But what they can do is bring down and stupefy a nation. And that's what I see happening as a father to teenagers. And by the way, I do not participate in the public school system, as I feel it is morally and completely corrupt and wrong. And part of that was in the speech last night. So I have sent my kids to parochial schools because that's our only choice. There is no, not, at least when my kids were born. There was a Montessori school, but I never got that. They let the kids do whatever the hell they want. So I sent mine to parochial schools. And I watched, even in parochial schools, as they have collaborated, as religion collaborates with socialism, how it has destroyed, to a certain extent, the independence of the kid. So what has happened through generations is it has normalized socialism, and it turns a blind eye to the corruption of it. And what it tries to do is it tries to offset it, and what it ends up doing is doubling down on the wrongdoing of socialism. And that happens when we talk about taxes. So as a real estate broker, one of the main reasons I am leaving Illinois and have stopped really recommending Illinois property, even though it looks like a deal, it never is, because of the taxation that goes along with Illinois property, because that taxation is meant to finance and buoy the failure of the socialism it tries to take care of you in the village raising your family and the village looking after you ideas of what has happened to America and primarily Illinois. So they constantly are cranking up the taxation of property owners in Illinois. That's just where it goes. It has no other way to go. And then what happens, the counteract, is that we pretend there's a write-off. But I want you to think for a minute. Last night, in one of Donald Trump's, what I think is a sleight of hand of the Trump tax cuts, he talks about how he's doubled the tax credit for children. This is something that's important to recognize. It's not a tax credit. It's a welfare check, because you don't need to even make enough money to qualify for a tax credit. You just got to have a kid. And in some cases, people receive far more money than they pay in taxes because they have kids. So in other words, you have the responsibility of your child. You are supposed to take the money you earn. The only place in America where socialism exists is in your house. That's where socialism is, and as a family, right? You're supposed to be the earner. In my day, the father was that. And you bring your money into the house, and it's distributed among your people, however you decide, mainly equally. And that's your obligation for falling in love and having children, right? To me, government should have no involvement in that. And I think it is completely immoral to tax somebody who may or may not be heterosexual, like Dan Proft, who does not have any kids, who has not found love, but he pays taxes to educate your kid. And it is sold under this idea of an investment into the society. And that's what you heard a lot of. And you hear it now from everybody. Invest, invest, invest. When what government doesn't do is invest, it spends, it confiscates. That's it. Now, it has its different ideas of where to spend and where to confiscate, but that's its real function. Government doesn't pay repercussions from the ramifications of its failure in investment. You do. Government doesn't lose a cent. You do. And when government loses, they come to you. And it is to the point now where they have a hand in your daily existence. And that is socialism. And that is what was articulated and rejected. Now, if it's practiced, that's a different thing, right? Here in Chicago, we see 17 scumbags running for mayor, all preaching one thing. Now, what they practice is a different thing. It's the same thing that will happen here after the speech and today and when we go back to our little enclaves, and the division that we pretend is a division is touted as just come together in unity. And I said yesterday, be careful when you come together in bipartisan agreements and unity, because that is the Louis Vuitton of government. It's very expensive when they come together. And when Donald Trump said that moment, I said, listen, although I don't get along and go along with the tyranny of a few guys in the White House controlling trade, and by the way, they're wrong. The tariff situation is wrong. It is a mistake, but it can be corrected. What cannot be corrected is when the people in the White House are Soviet socialists like Barack and they implement Obamacare. We are never going to get rid of that because the system loves the failure of it, because that is the strength of government, is the failure of Obamacare. So I hope it'll go on, but it really won't. It's going to be here forever, and that's it. But it is so crucially important that now as Republicans, and even those people who think themselves Democrats because they are just willfully ignorant to what the Democrat Party has become, which is the Politburo. Those old Democrats who say, wait a minute, I lost a brother fighting socialism. And what a magnificent feat it was yesterday for oh boy, that was a Freudian, for Donald Trump to acknowledge the World War II veterans, who we forget what they were fighting, was the National Socialist Party of the workers, by the way, just like the Congress people who cheered for those soldiers. So on one hand, it was a beautiful thing to see. On the other, it was despicable and disgusting to see them sconced in white under the guise of representing women and preaching the tyranny that we have lost hundreds of thousands of boys fighting. But Donald Trump did a great job recognizing, explaining, and declaring we will never be socialists. I found it to be great. I really did. And there was one moment where he did address the greatest cornerstone and the strongest weapon of tyranny, Obamacare. And he addressed it in a fashion that only really affects the principled people. Now, we pretend that it's about money, and people with money who make a certain amount of money aren't affected by Obamacare, but that's not true. Every human being is affected by Obamacare. The reality of whether someone can afford to buffer the costs or are principled enough to where it's depleting their life savings like me, I have spent over $100,000 in insurance premiums and never been to a doctor because Obamacare premiums have gone up over 300% on me. Now I have the insurance people, and who I love, by the way, Tom Marabali, C. Stephen Tucker. These are wonderful people, wonderful individual people. I've had the pleasure of talking to both of them. And C. Stephen Tucker said, Sean, maybe you qualify for something. No, Stephen, it's not about qualifying. It's about, do I want to go on welfare? I don't want to be a socialist, and I will go broke avoiding it because there is more principle and pride in the individuality of rejecting the corruption that socialism does in a slow, very methodical way. And it starts under, they always use your children. And then later they pretend it's okay to kill them, and we'll get to that later. But Donald Trump did mention insurance premiums, and I was disgusted by the lack of enthusiasm, by the people who claim to represent the lower echelon of earners, the socialists, Democrats, because what they realize is the water is too deep. The quicksand is up to your neck, and the more you wiggle, the deeper you get. But that doesn't mean we can't have a president who at least articulates it. And then I'll tell you why I'm disgusted after.
As we speak, large, organized caravans are on the march to the United States. We have just heard that Mexican cities, in order to remove the illegal immigrants from their communities, are getting trucks and buses to bring them up to our country in areas where there is little border protection.
I hit Prof's clip, and I'm supposed to hit Amy's clip, but I don't know. So 1, 2.
We eliminated the very unpopular Obamacare individual mandate penalty. And to give critically ill patients access to life-saving cures, we passed, very importantly, right to try. My administration has cut more regulations in a short period of time than any other administration during its entire tenure.
Absolutely great. Fantastic. Because obviously the strategy by Donald Trump is to pick away at the pillar of Obamacare and hope that those of us in the real world have the courage to take him up on it and reject Obamacare. Because what should be happening by libertarians, by old conservative Republicans, is that they should be boycotting Obamacare and its participation. Now, the problem is Obamacare hits that nerve of fear among the people, right, where they pretend that there is such a thing as insurance against death. There isn't. No one gets out alive. And we've lost the concept of insurance in healthcare because we've interwoven the argument because it isn't on principle anymore. So the reality is insurance is a scam. It was created to be a scam. It was created to sell you something it cannot possibly possess, which is the idea of security in your future death and illness that visits us all. Doesn't happen. Now they want it. It was originally supposed to take away the financial burden to your family. It doesn't do that anymore. It just burdens everybody else's family. And we call that insurance, when what it is a payoff scheme buffered by all the citizens, right? We can pretend that everybody's going to be great, regardless of your lifestyle. We don't reward those people who take care of themselves and do the right thing. In fact, we penalize those people and reward the sloths and the union members and those among us who really are the most reckless get away for free. If you're a drug addict and you don't work and you're a scoundrel, this is great socialized medicine. That's why I can always tell what people really think by the way in which they articulate socialism. When they say it's a great thing for society, well, then you really don't plan on being extraordinary. You really don't plan on being successful. You need that mental safety net of, well, listen, even though I'm probably going to dabble in drugs, gambling, and whores, I'll at least have my health care provided for. I mean, that's really what they don't have the balls to say, but that's what they're saying. The problem is that's a sign and an indication that society is not just willfully ignorant, but has the underlying fear of failure and is justifying the covetous nature of seizing from people with more than you. That's what we call Democrats and Republicans, unfortunately. But I get excited when a sign from the leader of the Republican Party and the president identifies and rejects it. Now, I think he's implementing little ways for us to, attack it. The problem is I don't think enough of us will do it. So I do like a lot of what happened. I really do yesterday. I thought it was fantastic. And there's a Ted Cruz clip here that I want to listen to, because I have to tell you what, I didn't hear it because I watched the State of the Union. I was tweeting my brains out, by the way. If you want to communicate on Twitter, it's Sean from EP. If you want to participate in the show, it's 312-642-5600. Now here's somebody that I supported early on. I have to say, as he was undermined by Donald Trump, as the lies were cast upon him and accepted by my fellow Republicans, I was a little disgusted, a little irritated with the outright cult-like support. But I do think Ted Cruz hopefully will live on to fight another day and maybe run. I don't think he'll be president. I think he was so successfully character assassinated, he's forever tainted. But the ideology of Ted Cruz, it isn't really about Ted Cruz. It's about freedom and liberty. So that mantle will be taken up by someone else, maybe somebody we don't know. Maybe we have a version of a Soviet like Cory Booker who hits all the right check marks, who can, kind of get to that upper echelon by announcing. But I do want to hear what Ted Cruz had to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Senate Judiciary Committee should not be a theater for mischaracterizing or twisting nominees' records or views, nor should it be an avenue for persecution. We've seen a growing pattern among Senate Democrats of hostility to religious faith. I have to say I was deeply troubled a few minutes ago to hear questioning of a nominee asking your personal views on what is sinful. In my view, that has no business in this committee. Article 6 of the Constitution says there should be no religious test for any public office. We have also seen Senate Democrats attack what they've characterized as religious dogma. We've seen Senate Democrats attack nominees for their own personal views on salvation. I don't believe this is a theological court of inquisition. I think the proper avenue for investigation of this committee is a nominee's record. So, Ms. Rao, let me talk about your record, and let me ask you about your actual record, which is what this committee should be looking at, not our own personal religious views or your religious views, whatever they may be.
So this was about Cory Booker. Should have read that before I hit the button there, kid. This was about Cory Booker and his rebuttal. This is Ted Cruz's rebuttal to Cory Booker in what is really a pattern of the socialist, which is to separate and conquer. It's very Sun Tzu. Now, the way that they do that is through false representation of minorities that they deem to be minorities, that they try to normalize evil, such as abortion, and they try to make you bend knee to their religion by condemning your religion. Now, here's the thing. When we talk about gay marriage, and that's what this is about, when you talk about marriage in general, I do not see the reason government is in marriage. I hold no ill will against homosexuals. I don't care. It's your choice. Just like I hold no ill will to drug addicts. That's your choice. I simply want you to bear the repercussions, not society. That's my philosophy when it comes to marriage, when it comes to drugs, when it comes to decisions that belong to the individual. I think our problem that has happened in modern day society is we do not know how to tell where government stops and where the citizen begins, where your life begins and where your life is to be void of government approval, acceptance, finance, or safety. That's what's happened, and that happens through the very strategic socialist onslaught of individuality and picking and choosing not just minorities, but also traditions or sexuality or nuances of individuality. And they try to make it as if it's one. So in other words, as I said to you earlier, all women are now socialists. All homosexuals are now socialists. All minority businesses are now socialists. All small. If you're under a certain income, you need to think like this. If you're above an income, you think like this. And regardless of the reality of how history proves these imbeciles wrong, because Cory Booker is an imbecile, but never underestimate how far an imbecile can get in the Socialist Party. They can get really high. And I think he should be feared because he's a senator. He announced that he's running. I understand he's not polling nearly as high as the walking ad for Viagra, Joe Biden, the corrupt scum that he is with his son, the bagman. But Cory Booker is a danger. And Cory Booker is a real believer. He is a follower, a fellow traveler to the communists. And here's what he does when he is confronted with a nominee that he doesn't want to put through. He figures out how to condemn them and rally the socialists.
I think that if Donald Trump gets elected president at this point with the personal life that he has, then anybody can.
You'd be like the third president, I think.
I think first of all, there's 2 more years until I might switch. So
he might get
married.
Give
me some time.
Well, I'm speaking into existence.
That's Cory Booker, and we pretend he's dating. He's going to get married and all this. I thought we had the clip of him questioning the nominee. It's astonishing to me that the more radical the socialist, the more influential they become. One of the things I was noticing in the Michael Moore documentary is that not only did he misuse data, it was almost like watching one of those green energy things. Not only did he misrepresent, in fact, he actually said at one point 71% of America, 71% of America is pro-choice. And I've always been fascinated by the way in which they hide behind the slaughter, the infanticide of our children as a choice by the mother. And, I think it's the benefit of being born into an ethnic family. I'm half Italian, and my mother was Italian. And you watch Italian mothers look after their children on a football field, and you see them run out if the kid gets tackled too much, and you see the protective nature of the mother, of ethnic mothers, really, primarily, because what American mothers show you is they don't feel this way, of ethnic mothers over their children, and how when I grew up, the only safety net I ever needed was that love of my mother and the reality of her always doing whatever she could to protect me. That's the kind of family I grew up in. The idea that my mother would kill me because her balance in her checkbook wasn't high enough or because the timing was wrong of my birth isn't something I ever had to live with. So to a certain extent, the idea that that is now an option is beyond disgusting to me. It's evil. And I feel that this turn in which the socialists have taken is an evil turn. And I'm hoping that it will cripple them. I'm hoping that when fat slob propagandists like Michael Moore say 71% of America is for killing babies, that they say, wait a minute, I'm not in. And they have that epiphany where they realize, I don't think like that. Like watching my wife last night as she was told that she's supposed to think Nancy Pelosi represents her. I think that we have an out there, and I'm hoping the reality of the evilness of socialism and of the Democrat Party will bail out freedom and liberty. I think it's the only way that we do it, because I don't think the Republican argument to it is strong enough. I think it's just slowing down the eventual destination of servitude. But every once in a while, and I saw this as Cuomo passed infanticide in New York. I see a rejection of it by Democrats. And I don't know how you can't reject infanticide. It is such an evil that the idea we talk about it and we've given it this name, other than killing, is almost mind-boggling. And I often laugh at the fact these are the same people who want to free criminals. Why don't we pardon the babies and abort the criminals? You want to do that? We could call it infanticide. But let's listen to this New York scumbag, who, by the way, I heard Dan on the way in. He was talking about if their last name wasn't Cuomo, what would Cuomo be qualified to do? You've got one on TV. And the reality is nothing. And that's part of the reason I think we need to break up these historic political families. But let's listen to what happens when you don't break them up and you pretend they are qualified.
SALT was an economic civil war. It literally restructured the economy.
All right. I thought this was about abortion. It's not. It's about what happens after you tax like a socialist.
SALT was an economic civil war. It literally restructured the economy to help red states at the cost of blue states. That's exactly what it did. It was a diabolical political maneuver in the tax code that actually raised taxes on Democratic states, lowered taxes on Republican states, and financed the Republican state tax cut from the Democratic states. I mean, if people actually understood what it was that they were doing, there would have been an uprising. We are now seeing the effect of it.
That's his philosophy, by the way. What he's condemning is the philosophy of the Democrats. But I as he was saying that, were you not thinking about what a minimum income or a minimum wage increase does to a small business? Were you thinking that too? Because I laugh in Illinois, I'm driving in, and they have Illinois and J.B. Pritzker and the Illinois Democrats are now raising the minimum wage on small business to $15 an hour. Now, we could talk about the principles of how that nationalizes entrepreneurs and how that makes government in control of your business and how that will destroy business. There's no question about it. That's all going to happen. But do you realize that what they pass as a shield of virtue, hey, we just want the minimum people to make $15 an hour, has the ramifications of destroying the very business they pretend to nationalize? The problem is, the more that they do this, the more that we hear these names of these clear and present socialists, the more popular and the higher up they become in their party. Cory Booker, Ocasio-Cortez, Cuomo, Bloomberg. Name a Democrat that isn't preaching socialist principles. Can you name one? I left off the most obvious, Bernie Sanders, but he's not a Democrat. He always was a Soviet. It is time as people, as citizens, we recognize and reject socialism. But here's the key. It can't be just in the Democrat Party. Otherwise, we will continue on the trajectory of tyranny. It has to be, as Republicans, we recognize socialism when touted by Republicans. Now, I'm not going to attack Donald Trump and his tariff policies, because those of us who understand what a tariff is, and when he chants about billions upon billions to the Treasury, we realize those billions and billions to the Treasury are in the form of taxes. That a tariff is a tax, and that is a socialist weapon. Control, manipulation of choice and outcome is what socialism is. I want to get to us and celebrate the fact that today we have rejected, or we had the leader of the Republican Party, the President of the United States, reject socialism. Now, if he turns around and talks about it, okay, fine, but let's attack that issue. But let's recognize the fact that we must hit its strongest and we must tear down the strongest pillars of tyranny, and that is the Democrat. That is the Democrat ideals. That is what are their strongholds? Healthcare, education, minimum income, labor extortion rackets. These items, these four pillars, are where the tyranny of socialism sits on. It is time as union members, you, if you're extraordinary, start to ask questions. Why does the sloth make what I make? And from that, you will destroy the minimum wage payment. Because as a small business person, why am I mandated to pay incompetence $15 an hour? When the way in which I can change that incompetence is to pay a lesser and let them learn, let them be of value to me. It is only through our articulation and our recognition of socialism that we can reject it. It's easy to start with the Democrats. It's harder to bring it to our own party. But ironically, I think that within this dismal present that we're in, where socialists control the most important body of government, the Congress, that the more we recognize this, the more we reject it, and the more we can come together as non-socialists, the faster we can tear it down. So before I go, I wanted to get to this clip because I do really appreciate it, and it's, I think it's going to be Dan's. I hope so.
We stand with the Venezuelan people in their noble quest for freedom, and we condemn the brutality of the Maduro regime, whose socialist policies have turned that nation from being the wealthiest in South America into a state of abject poverty and despair.
Because the socialism that does that can only be implemented in force. Any policy who demands coercion, conformity, collectivism is a policy that needs to be rejected, open and hostilely. Because Venezuela didn't get here in 17 hours. It got here under the same talking points the Democrats get elected. Cory Booker's platform, Ocasio-Cortez's election, Underwood, Sean Casten, pick a Democrat that won. They are speaking Venezuelan socialism. And they are using the children. They are using safety. They are using minimum standard of living in the same fashion that the Maduro communist who calls himself a socialist does. Recognize it. Reject it. Freedom is great. It's scary, and some of us fail. We're all going to die. But are we all going to live free? You have to live free in your mind, first and foremost. You have to recognize and reject communism, even when they call it socialism, even when they claim to be a Democrat. My name is Sean Thompson. This is the Liberty Hour. I'll be filling in for Joe Walsh tomorrow, 5 to 7, Friday, 5 to 7. Be sure and tune in. And I'm not really offended that you didn't call, maybe a little mildly. But from now on, I think we're going to do these from my cigar store. This way it's easier on me, and I can have a few more minutes. So I want to thank you very much for listening, and I hope you listen Thursday and Friday to the Joe Walsh program.